Better about turn my radio off.
Hit your mute too, Miss Lewis.
What's that?
Your mute button.
You want me to mute myself? I will
Only
do
when
that.
you're not talking.
Well, good evening and welcome to this evening's proceedings of the Grand Rapids Public Schools and this special work session. Today is Monday, March 29. Ms. Lewis, will you please call the roll this evening?
Mrs. Williams?
Present.
Dr. Baker?
Here.
Ms. Davis?
Here.
Dr. Flores?
Present.
Ms. Grant?
Present.
Ms. Lewis is here. Reverend Matias?
Present.
Mr. Ross?
Present.
And President Chotke.
I am here. Thank you, Ms. Lewis.
We
May I
have-
please? Thank you. May I please have a motion for approval of today's agenda?
So moved.
Support.
All right, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. We'll move on to our special order of business this evening to discuss the 3 interviews that we heard from 4 strategic planning firms last week, Monday. So the process for this evening is that we will share a consensus rating document on the screen here in just a moment. Each board member will share our cumulative scores for each of the 3 firms. We're just going to simply start by filling out that form. So you'll hear us each read off a series of 3 scores for the 3 firms. We'll begin to see where consensus develops. We'll also use the feedback that we received from the district and then ultimately move toward a vote. We'll have some discussion of the highlights of the firms that received the most votes for each board member, but we'll do that after we move through that document sharing. So Mr. Garib, if you are ready, you may share. Great. Okay. Any questions about the process before we begin? Great. My plan for this evening is to follow the roll call. So we're going to begin with Ms. Williams. Ms. Williams, will you share your scores, cumulative scores for each of the 3 firms?
My cumulative score for Insight was a 12. Greenway and both public consulting group, a 9.
All right. Thank you very much. Dr. Baker, you are next.
I had 12 for Greenway, 7 for Insight, and 10 for public consulting.
Thank you very much. Ms. Davis.
I have 10 for Insight, 10 for public consulting, and 9 for Greenway.
Thank you. Ms. Lewis.
Yes, for Insight, I had 10. And for Greenway, I had 12. And for public consulting, I had 12.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Flores.
For Greenway, I have 11. For Insight, I have 12. And for public consulting group, I have 11.
Thank you. Ms. Grant.
All right, for Greenway, I had a 9. For Insight, I had an 8. And for public, I had a 9 as well.
Thank you very much. Reverend Matias.
All right, good evening. For Greenway, I had a 10. For Public Consulting Group, I had a 9. And for Insight Education, I had a 9.
Thank you. Mr. Ross?
Going left to right, 11, 11, 9. 11 Greenway, 11 Insight, 9 PCG.
Perfect. Very good. And my scores are for Greenway, I have a 10. For Insights, I have a 9. And for Public Consulting Group, an 8. Julie, I know you're out there. Can you do some math in the background while we begin some of our discussion and deliberation around the firms? So what I'd like to do next is just to talk through some of the highlights of what you heard from the firm that you scored with the highest points. I see that Ms. Davis, you have a tie, so we'll let you address both. But that's why I'd like to begin this next round. So Ms. Williams, I'll go back to you if that's all right with you, and just hear a little bit about what you heard from Insight Education Group that you felt aligned with our goals for strategic planning.
All right, took a minute to unmute, I apologize. I did like their experience in the educators' background of their firm. I did like also that they have been engaged in their own equity work now for 3 years. They spoke about their work with HBCUs, about one of the things that I tell you what, that just stood out to me, that they spoke about inspiring and motivating. And I think after our transformation plan that, and that's where they saw our district, that just kind of knocked it out of the park for me in that regard, that they really saw that. Particular about the diversity of their staff. They highlighted that, as well as that equity was a way of doing business. So not that it's just something that's set aside, but it is the way they do business. That struck me as well. I thought also it was important to highlight that even in wanting the community to be involved and having ambassadors in the community engagement, that they were willing to even question whether or not those ambassadors were the right people to help them get the answers that the district needed. That stood out to me. And then they spoke about the diversity of our own board. Again, that just to me kind of brought it all together as well, that they ended on that note, really acknowledging the work that we are doing in the space of equity. So those were some of the highlights that I had about why I was selected them as our top.
All right, thank you, Ms. Williams. Thank you so much. Dr. Baker, may I hear from you next?
Yeah, I really liked the thing that stood out to me about Greenway was what I would call their reflexive community engagement, meaning that they would have community input sessions. They would come back, summarize what they heard. They would take what they summarized back to the community to make sure that they had understood correctly, and they had that process throughout. And so I think that was a very effective strategy. Overall, I also just was impressed with their just overall work background. They also, I thought, had a strong understanding of how to incorporate the search for more equitable outcomes as part of their work, and they provided strong examples. But I like that they connected to college access that they talked about in Atlanta. They talked about more wraparound supports being needed throughout the district. I think that those are very important key things that districts have to take into account, is how do you incorporate the community. And also, they showed a strong understanding that education is connected to the community economy. and how they incorporated that analysis into understanding how to create curriculum and programs that matter for the schools, but also how they interact with the other economic systems of the community. So I thought that they were just strong across the board. So that's why I chose Greenway.
All right, thank you, Dr. Baker. Ms. Davis, let's go to you next.
Okay, so I will speak to Insight. I have highlighted that they spoke of weaving equity throughout the process and throughout the strategic plan. I have that they talked about the leadership pipeline and recruiting and retaining educators of color. I highlighted that when they talked about stakeholders, they talked about going to the people, which I think could help with some of our hard to reach stakeholders. I liked their example of Guilford County when they spoke of the economically disadvantaged white students outperforming economically advantaged Black students and how they worked through that for change. And I also highlighted, like Kim said, that they partner with HBCUs and just their work with equity. And as far as, yeah, I did have a tie. So public consulting group, just a couple highlights. I liked that they had their whole team there so that we could just get a clear picture of who we would be working with. I liked that they referenced having a special ed team and an early childhood team, so experts in specific areas. I highlighted that they talked about collaborative systems and processes and structures that fit with Grand Rapids Public, and that they blend experts in project management with educational experts. I also enjoyed hearing about their success story with families having tools to better understand school data, and their highlighting of engagement for Spanish families. And I liked the idea of having an email address that they provide for stakeholders to give direct input that doesn't go through the board necessarily, because I think we would see some people maybe speak up about things that we might not hear about otherwise. So those are some highlights.
All right, thank you, Ms. Davis. Dr. Flores.
Well, I I went with Insight as being my number one choice. You know, I look at one of the factors of being both virtual and on-site in person, and I think that that was a drawback from Greenway, whereas I think they're all very highly capable of leading us to the the strategic development plan mission that we have. And I think we'd be well served by any one of them. But I really like the fact that Insight, you know, has very highly qualified individuals doing the work. Both Dr. Stickler and Dr. Ramirez Dickerson. And I think that because our district has such a high number of Latinx students and African American students, that we need at least a bilingual perspective there from one of the staff members. And I see a higher level of diversity potential in Insight, having that background on staff. And the fact that they are both research-based and that they had conducted both qualitative and quantitative work across 8 states and many large and small districts comparable to Grand Rapids Public Schools population. So those things stood out for me. And as they accentuated their experiences, I was very impressed with Insight that they had worked with Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation. I found that in their presentation, not in the interview, but in their proposal as I went back to read that again. But it also impressed me that they had worked in coaching administrators and they developed a leadership academy for administrators of color. And then that they kept up with research and Chiefs of Change, where they constantly analyze research on exemplary practices in the field of education. And I think that's important. I think that they would bring a higher a level of examination of our equity and what we have done in the past and what we're currently doing, and that they would give us a good roadmap for the future. I think they met all of those requirements and deliverables. Their plan is excellent, as are the others. I think that that made the difference for me. The other two were kind of tied in. Well, they have some diversity and yes, they have some experience, but this one, if I have to choose between the three, I would go with Insight.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Flores.
Thank you.
Ms. Grant.
All right. So I think we had three wonderful options. So this was a little hard for me. So I ended up with two that tied, and it was because I felt like tying all three of them wouldn't be helpful at all. But so I had Greenway. I liked their overview of the Achieve Atlanta program. I thought it was really comparable to our Promise Zone program, and to be able to see the achievements that they've made mirrored a lot of the things that we want to see come out of that program. And them acknowledging things that we've already learned through that program, you know, that students need these wraparound supports and they need other things to really be able to achieve. So that showed me the equity lens that they're working through when they're doing their work. They also just made a point of how they are looking through the data to find inequities. So instead of just deciding on our own what inequities we need to address, like really digging into data and finding those things. I also loved when they talked about leveraging other people in the communities, other organizations and entities to do some of that community engagement. So not GRPS always having to host something, but having a toolkit put together for other people to host and reach out to people. I think it's very comparable to that email address where people may show up to something that Baxter Community Center holds, or you know, some other organization, but they might not come to something that's just hosted by us to really express how they feel. So I thought that was great. For public, I appreciated that the full team was there, the diversity of their team in backgrounds, not just professionally, but across the board. They felt very collaborative. So everyone was engaged in presenting and giving a synopsis, which I thought was important. As Ms. Davis said, I really appreciated the point about the specialized teams that had, you know, certain specializations across education. I thought that was important. So those are the reasons why I chose those two as my top.
Great, thank you, Ms. Grant. Ms. Lewis, let's go to you next.
All right, there. Well, I had Greenway and public consulting as a tie, but after I thought about it a little more, I really liked public consulting the best, but they were both excellent. As Dr. Flores has said, all three of them are very good. I was impressed with the public consulting one, especially because they spoke to the idea that there were many language differences and they could work with non-English speaking people, and I thought that was good. They also talked about setting up teams that would deal with curriculum, special ed, and English as a second language. I like the fact that they said that they were research guided, but they recognize that they must know the community. So those were the strengths I thought with public consulting. With Greenway, I also like them, and they seem to know the district when they must have done a lot of background on our district. They said that they use national information and research and base their decisions or their suggestions on research and data. And the last thing I liked especially is they spoke many times to the fact that they're dedicated to student success. So that's what I thought.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Reverend Matthias.
All right. I had Greenway with a 10, and then my other two were ties for 9. I think that what I appreciated about Greenway is that they had done some obviously some research on our district and understanding the diversity that's there. I thought that one of the things that they mentioned in there was certainly wraparound services, but also the social emotional and some of the racial components, not only of our district, but then Grand Rapids in general. And so having to encompass that. One of the things that they mentioned, I think, was policy actionizing, if I'm not mistaken, and really looking at, again, how current policies are going to impact, and then obviously looking at future. One of the things that I was impressed with was that they weren't just about being politically correct, but also looking at the data. And so if data was driving something else, it seems that they would tell us that. They would say to us, hey, listen, we know that you're focusing here, but the data is saying this. And so balancing those two, as opposed to just going with the flow of the river, but saying, hey, this has to stand out for you guys as you guys look at. So I appreciated that. I also looked at that they shared several different examples of how they were applying some of the principles to specific areas of school districts that they were working with. Certainly reviewing of the resources to be able to apply, or reviewing that, scanning the data, higher education work. So again, we have a rich partnership here in Grand Rapids of higher ed, and so leveraging that for our kids, especially with our sort of promise zone designation, what's the next level for us? So I appreciated that. And certainly equity, they said equity within data. And so again, that was important to me, to be able to sift out what pressures our district is facing, but then also looking at other areas that are equally as important. And then of course, with the other two of insight, and then also public, I did appreciate public's responding to some of the questions that were posed to them, and them being a little bit more thorough with PowerPoints in really dissecting some of our own information and then applying it to their template of looking at things. So.
Thank you, Reverend Matthias. Mr. Ross, go to you.
Yeah, so I think, I don't think we could really go wrong with any of them. For me though, Greenway and Insight were the ones that got the nod for me. For Greenway, I think, a few of the things I did like, again, sort of that leveraging work that we've done previously, reference to the transformation plan and sort of, the idea of, moving forward based on, what are the next sort of actionable steps that sort of fit with where we left off with the transformation plan. I did like also the equity and the data piece, as far as, really segmenting that and looking at that a little bit more closely. I like some of the work that they have done in some of the, other places throughout the country. They've really worked with some diverse populations, I thought they were sort of appropriate in size, not too big, not too small. And there was just a little something about that seemed to frankly just feel good to me. I liked also the intentionality about, their outreach efforts, but also I think in general, I felt like it was easier to follow, what they, how they would lead us through this process, sort of like the sort of theoretical foundation that they offered in their proposal. I forget the text that they mentioned, but it seemed to be, a really process oriented approach that just seemed to resonate well with me. And I think even as far as their team, while they may not have been as diverse as some of the other teams, I did think that there was a good sort of academic or professional diversity, so to speak. When you look at the team, the company itself had a combination of educators, corporate folks, nonprofit folks, and I think that diversity in thought was something that I also found attractive. For insight, for some of the things that have already been said, but I think I'll underscore. I did think that there was probably they were the strongest as far as their approach to diversity inclusion. I definitely like the sort of self-analysis and the work they're doing within their own organization in that regard. I found that appealing. Also, like the fact that there were a group of practitioners. When we asked the question about, how do they stay abreast of trends and things like that, I like the simplicity of doing the work. Is how they stay abreast of things, and I thought that was some real benefit and strength to folks who kind of still get their hands in the dirt, so to speak. Boom, 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 boom. I was also impressed with the stuff they're doing in North Carolina. I thought it was a bit courageous and bold to, frankly, call out the racism piece as a barrier. And, I think I like the idea of a company, frankly, not being afraid to step into places that may potentially be a bit messy. But the fact of the matter is, if that was their perspective, I appreciated their transparency in going there. And I could say other things, but I think that's enough.
Great, thank you, Mr. Ross. Greenway Strategy Group was the firm that I scored most high as well. I appreciated when I believe Ms. Greenway said that they advocate for growth and improvement, even when it involves difficult conversations. And we know certainly that equity work will require difficult conversations in our community and as the Board of Education. I loved when she said we test it, and she was referencing the ongoing stakeholder process and that iterative process of developing a process, testing it, and then coming back to it for further stakeholder engagement and process improvement. I know Ms. Grant mentioned this, but allowing community members to lead their own events, thought that was a strength. And I appreciated that, again, Ms. Greenway said that they were doing equity audits before they were a thing. So leading the way in this work. And then I think the only other thing that maybe wasn't said by my colleagues was that their research extends beyond the educational, including housing and birth rates, et cetera. And I just appreciated that as we seek to be a true community partner in the city of Grand Rapids and impact our families in more ways than just education, I appreciated that holistic research would help build a really comprehensive strategic plan that supports students and families. So those were the strengths that I heard in that discussion. Okay, so here are the scores ahead of us. I will also make mention that Dr. Roby, our superintendent, and the executive cabinet went through this same work and rubric and have also scored Greenway Strategy Group as the highest scoring firm. So now it's time to make a decision. I will continue to allow for some dialogue and discussion if anyone would like to do further advocacy. But we do have in front of us, of course, the cumulative score leading with Greenway Strategy Group. So is there further discussion or dialogue right now that you'd like to have before we move into a vote? Dr. Flores.
I'd like to ask how important it is for us to have both virtual and in person. I think that when you're evaluating these three entities, one is strictly virtual. That's Greenway. The other two are virtual and in person. I don't know. I see the next few months and as very important, but I don't see us in a strictly virtual mode anymore. And I think you look at the cost factor and you compare what we're getting, all of them are fairly similar, except that whole virtual and in-person piece. To me, that makes a difference.
This is Mrs. Williams. I'd also like to highlight one of the things that I did like about Insight, that they specifically stated that they would be providing the plan to include specifics all the way down to what it would look like landing on a teacher's desk or an administrator's desk. And I thought that that was also kind of indicative of how they really plan to dig in and do the work and how they can look at it from all those perspectives.
Thank you. Ms. Grant.
So I have a question here. If we because I've had some of my colleagues speak to support Insight, all of these scores are very close. So if you were going, how would we, if support is shown for, Insight or public, I'm just wondering what that looks like. How do we come to any other conclusion than what's here?
Well, we're looking for the most qualified firm based on our evaluation. And
I guess my question is, the statement was made that people can advocate. So if someone has had a change of heart, I'm just wondering what the process looks like outside of advocating. If they're advocating does create some movement, what does that look like?
That is a great question that I am not entirely sure of the answer. So I think if there's, I'm thinking, hold on.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. It's a valid question.
I guess while you're thinking, I'm wondering if this fits in with Ms. Grant's question, but obviously if we are advocating for any particular firm, we're not necessarily saying we're beholden to simply the scores. Obviously the scores are one thing we're considering. Obviously also maybe the thoughts of the cabinet, but at the end of the day, I guess it's going to come down to a vote. So although the scores may say one thing, is it just a matter of if someone wanted to put a motion on the table for one of the particular groups and take the vote and see how that falls? Or again, I'm just also thinking aloud too, not necessarily suggesting, but just trying to figure out how we move forward with it.
Sure. May I call Ms. Pitts forward just to help guide us through policy piece of our purchasing, and then we'll speak further.
And I didn't want to, if there's anyone else who would like to advocate, I didn't want to cut that short because it is actually helpful to me and I'm sure to others. So I don't want to cut that portion short.
President Shockey?
Yes, Ms. Lewis.
Dr. Flores made me think about the virtual and in-person. And I know that Greenway was going to be virtual, but I think public consulting had somebody from Saginaw who was going to be our person working with us particularly. So I thought that that would be an in-person affair, but I have to agree with him about, I don't want any more virtual in my life if I can avoid it. Doing things this way is just, I don't think as effective as when we're all together and can see one another and so on. And I certainly would not want to do something like this all virtually. I'd prefer that either Public Consulting or Insight, because I think Public Consulting talked about that young woman from Saginaw that they were going to have here. So just an observation.
Sure. I mean, of course, we'll have to adhere to the guidelines of our state and what's allowable for gathering. So that will come first and foremost about whether or not we're able to meet in person in that way. So I suspect early on, based on current orders from the health department, that we may be required to do some virtual stakeholder meetings, but as allowable, I hear you that is, sounds like that's rising to the top as a priority.
President Shockey, I'm sorry, Dr. Baker. I just wanted to inform President Shockey that Ms. Pitts was on the call.
Thank you very much. Dr. Baker, if you want to go ahead, and then we'll invite Ms.
Yeah,
Pitts.
just a quick reflection on the virtual versus in person. I know it says that work will be conducted virtually, but there are also many references on the project outline that include in person, such as possible in-person focus groups, in-person interviews. There's a fairly consistent kind of caveat to some of their statements, whether in person or virtual. I assume that would be determined based on safety protocols, et cetera. So I didn't get the sense that they are saying for sure only virtual. So I didn't hear that if other people said it. It does seem like there's plenty of references of in-person work.
Yeah, Dr. Baker, I see that now. It looks as though the project approach is virtual through June, and then afterwards is allowing for in-person meetings.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
It's possible, yes.
Jen, do we know whether or not that changes their proposal or their cost?
Because the proposal specifically states those things, I would suspect that would not change their proposal or cost, but I can't speak on behalf of them. That's how I read the project fee parameters.
It does say project fees, and it's based on in virtual through June, and then
yeah. And specifically notes, including all travel expenses, would lead me to believe that they intend on traveling. Ms. Pitts, welcome. Thank you, as always, for your reminding us of the banks of the river on our purchasing. Can you please help with some guidance?
Yeah, well, you guys don't have, you didn't set out a rigid process for how you were going to decide this, that you were going to basically rank the groups. Obviously, your first impressions, the things that happened as a result of your listening to the different vendors, obviously should be your primary consideration. However, if there are other new factors or things as you're discussing today that might have people change their minds about what they heard, then I think, or the additional information that was provided. Remember, they provided some additional information. You also had set forth a process where you would consider that information too. So this was your initial, the first, on Monday was your initial reflections based on the information that you heard. Then you were going to reflect upon that and consider the additional information. So I think you are clearly within your rights and the parameters that you set up to take into consideration those additional factors and any additional information that's brought forth today from your colleagues. Does that help?
Yes, very much so. Thank you, Ms. Pitts. Any other questions from my board members, my colleagues for Ms. Pitts?
Ms. Pitts, then, given that and the communication that we're sharing, is it something that we would have the possibility to still look at this framework and maybe change our information or our numbers in that regard to, is that possible, I guess, to really reflect all of the information that's being received?
Yes, I think that is possible because that's the way you all established it in the beginning, that Monday was not your firm and final, that you were going to reflect and take into consideration the additional information that you had. And like I said, if there's any, I would be very careful though about changing based on persuasion of other people's arguments. I would base it on any information that you might have that you had not heard or had not considered before during the process.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question of Ms. Pitts, please?
Yes, of course.
Ms. Pitts, would you look at page 28? Read that, if you will, please, and give us some guidance as to whether or not this proposal is based on virtual or in person. Because I have reread the other pieces that Dr. Baker referred to, but I'm looking at what I believe is a virtual proposal for $75,000. And unless someone can show me where that is different, then I'll stand with my argument that this is a virtual proposal.
Unfortunately, Dr. Flores, I don't have the document in front of me, so you'd have to.
Okay. All right. Can I encourage our team here of board members to reread this document? Just the piece that talks about, it is on the last page, project fees. And if you look down at these bullets and it tells you that the project fee is based upon the following parameters, I do not see where we can make the interpretation that this includes in person. That it's obviously a virtual proposal, and therefore my argument on that, it just in comparing these, we're comparing to some respects apples and oranges, because the other two are proposing both virtual and in person, one for 46,000 and the other for what was it, 84,000.
Dr. Flores, what page numbers that you mentioned?
That was
Page 28.
Page 28.
And it's the second paragraph, the first bullet point.
Yeah, what I'm reading is that given the expected limitations, they were going to be virtual, and then given potentially April through June, between April and June 21st gatherings of 2021. So it seems that it's both. If our governor says these limitations are lifted, then I would expect that whatever considerations would be there would be a possibility for them to strategize and plan in person and whatnot, given the limitations. But at any given point, especially given our state, we could be imposed with other things that would derail a bunch of other potential plans that we might have in strategizing for this. So
I feel confident in reading this, that it is, that in-person will be coordinated after June 2021, assuming our state is allowing those kinds of gatherings.
So I see it in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th bullet point references to either in person or with a caveat of including virtual opportunities.
I would go, I kind of have to stand with Dr. Flores with this. I believe words have power, and based on what the way this reads, it says the project fee is based upon, and then it says the scope of this work outlined in this proposal will be conducted virtually.
Well, finish reading that.
No, it says due to expected limitations of COVID-19 on in-person gatherings between April and June 21. It never once came back and stated that this could be a possibility. And so their words specifically says, this proposal will be conducted virtually based on the expected limitations. It doesn't go back to say it will entertain in person.
Between April and June.
You know, if I could, I mean, I do read it that in person will be available, you know, if we want, and based on, you know, what the guidelines are of the state. But considering, to Mrs. Pitt's points, since we didn't sort of identify this as an absolute drop dead sign the contract date today, I think it's appropriate for us to provide Greenway that feedback that, you know, we were strongly considering them. This was the concern about, was it all virtual, and just simply get that clarification and really say to them clearly that if our guidelines allow for such, we would expect some in-person work to happen after June. I don't think we need to keep guessing and sort of thing.
I was going to ask if that's something we can quickly find the answer to. I'm reading it personally as they will be virtual at everything, even if it's an in-person meeting. That's how I read it. So if it's an in-person meeting in our community, they'll be tuning in virtually. And I read a lot of the district will, you know, provide this, the district will post this, the district will organize the focus groups, and we will be there virtually. That's how I'm reading a lot of it. So I agree with Mr. Ross. I'd like some clarity.
Ms. Pitts, may we take a vote tonight with the caveat of this being something that we value, and if we find out that when we receive the clarity that it does not meet that, are we able to then vote again? Mr. Gorman, I see you.
Yeah, President Shockett, we received some information from Greenway, and it says their proposal is virtual only through June. So through June, the proposal is virtual. After that, it is not. Of course, we have to ensure that the state is opened up, but this proposal is virtual through June.
All right, thank you, Dr. Gorman, for that clarification. Okay. That answers that question.
President Shockey,
yes, Ms. Lewis.
I did want to add that I did find in the public consulting group, they said that our ground support would be furnished by Tanisha Brooks, and I believe she's the young woman from Saginaw, and they have also worked in Saginaw and Detroit, and it seems to me that and Flint, and it seems that they would have a lot of experience dealing with our kind of school. So that's my plug for public consulting.
Well, the other new information we had this week was provided by the administration, and they had a strong endorsement of Greenway being their first choice as well. And I want to trust their feedback since they're more likely to understand the work that's going to be involved.
I also value that feedback in knowing that they will lead the coordination efforts as well.
I'd like to make a motion for Greenway to be the facilitator of our strategic planning efforts.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. Any further discussion?
Just to clarify, there is a 4 and a 3-point difference in between the two other agencies, and so that's also a reality too.
Okay, further discussion about the motion. Okay, hearing none. Ms. Lewis, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Mrs. Williams?
Yes.
Dr. Baker?
Yes.
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Dr. Flores?
No.
Ms. Grant?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis, yes. Reverend Matias?
Yes.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
President Shockey?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, colleagues. And thank you to those that are listening. These discussions are incredibly valuable. This is where we get to hear one another's insights and values. And while we are rarely in perfect agreement, this is the platform by which we get to come to consensus. So I just want to say thank you for the robust discussion around what is a very important 9 months ahead of us as we move our district into strategic planning. So thank you. Ms. Pitts, thank you very much for your guidance. As always, we appreciate you joining us. All right, I will move forward into the special orders of business. First, we're going to have an update on grades 9 through 12 and the return to in-person learning. Dr. Gorman.
President Shockey and members of the Board of Education, I have 2 updates for you this evening. One is on the return to additional in-person learning for high school students, and the other is around athletics from Mr. Kurt Johnson. As it relates to additional in-person learning for grades 9 through 12, we are continuing to follow guidance from the Kent County Health Department. As of right now, we are unable to bring back students in grades 9 through 12 on Monday, April 12th, for more in-person learning because our high schools cannot accommodate the Kent County Health Department's 6 feet of social distancing recommendations for high school students. Once the recommendation moves from 6 feet to 3 feet, we will be able to provide more in-person instruction for grades 9 through 12. We will continue to collaborate with the Kent County Health Department and bring back students when we are able to safely do so. And we will continue to keep you posted as recommendations change rapidly. So that was a lot of information. We are continuing to communicate with the Kent County Health Department. The 3 feet to 6 feet piece is a really big deal for us. So as it is for the Kent County Health Department. So again, we are staying with our plan to bring back our K through 8 students, but high school, we need a little more time and a little more guidance from the Kent County Health Department so that we can make the right decision for our students. Are there any questions that I can answer at this time as it relates to this piece?
So basically, the other high schools that are in session, what is the difference between them and us?
We are following the recommendations from the Kent County Health Department. I can't speak for other school districts, Reverend Matias, but we've been lockstep with the Kent County Health Department since the beginning of the pandemic. And we continue to follow the science and follow the guidance from the Kent County Health Department. And we haven't deviated from that. And as we shared a couple of weeks ago, or last week, I'm sorry, the weeks blend together. We said that we were still uncertain about the high school decision based on the feedback that we received from the Kent County Health Department. We want more in-person learning. We know our parents do, but we have to wait just a little bit longer till we can get to that 3 feet requirement.
How many high school students have been infected with the virus in this region or this area?
I'd have to get that information for you, Reverend Matias.
I have heard that there is a spike in the state. So I just want to be clear. So the decision at this point is on April 12th, because we have not received changes in the distance. We will not be collapsing the hybrid schedule. But we may, if we don't know that they will, but we may, if there's a recommendation that we can go to the 3 feet rule.
Absolutely. And we will be bringing juniors back for high stakes testing the week that we're bringing everyone else back, which is it's Tuesday, April 13 for our juniors. So we're still having high stakes testing on that particular week for our juniors. But as of right now, we have to wait a little bit longer before we can bring the high school students back. And I believe we referenced that last week.
I do have another question. So,
Absolutely.
so your team or the district did not come up with a plan for a 6 feet distancing, like the number of students that we could handle if we, similar to what you're proposing for K-8 of a 6 feet distance, how many could you have in high school similarly, where you would divide them up into A, B, or something like that?
So
So there was no plan for that, correct?
there is a plan for kindergarten through 8th grade to come back because it only requires 3 feet of social
Right.
distancing. For the high schools, it's 6 feet. We cannot fit A and B together in our classrooms with the air requirements for the classrooms. And also there's not enough room in our high school classrooms to sit kids 6 feet apart. We just can't do it.
Meaning that the number of people that requested in school, you can't accommodate that number of people that perhaps said, yes, I want my high schooler to go back to school. And the number was, I don't know, 7,000. I'm just throwing out a number. I don't know. Is that what you're saying?
When you put both cohorts together, cohorts A and B, bring them back all together and put them in classrooms, there's no way you can get 6 feet between the high school kids. You can't do it. If it were 3 feet, we could do it. We have confidence that we can do it, but we cannot do it in the high schools with 6 feet. We are continuing to monitor it. We want our kids to be back. We really do, but we can't meet the requirements with 6 feet. And we've been following the Kent County Health Department's guidance all along.
I know, but what I'm asking is, what is the actual number of kids that we could actually have if we were to have a 6 feet distance? Is it 100? Is it 300?
It goes more by classrooms, Reverend Matias. So again, we can't just throw up, this building can have this number. It goes to the classroom space. And it's not just the students who are in the classroom, it's the teacher who's in the classroom. It's the student teacher who's potentially in the classroom. It's everybody who's in the classroom.
Right.
And it's not this number like Union can have 500 or Innovation Central can have 400. It goes to each specific classroom. And I could give you some ballpark numbers, but I don't think that would be very helpful. We know that we can't get to 6 feet in our classrooms with our high school kids. And that's the recommendation from the Kent County Health Department.
Yeah, I would have liked more exact numbers than a ballpark figure or hypotheticals. It really.
We have exact numbers for every single classroom in the Grand Rapids Public Schools. Every single one we have them for. So I believe that information was provided last week when we gave an update as to how close we would be with each of the rooms. But again, 6 feet, we just can't get there for high school kids.
Dr. Gorman, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
If in the fall, if the recommendation is still 6 feet, are there plans in process for trying to get those kids back in person, or will it always be like if 6 feet stays forever, are we planning something at this point or thinking about it?
We can't make those predictions, Ms. Davis. We are going to continue to follow the guidance of the Kent County Health Department. That's what we've been doing. So is there a plan for 6 feet? We can't fit an entire classroom full of students with the 6 feet requirement. We can't place half of the students in there with the 6 feet requirement. If it's 3 feet, we can. And I don't know what other district, I know what other districts are doing, but I know that we are following the guidance from the Kent County Health Department.
This is what we set forth in our original plan with our data dashboard and tracking our metrics. We've said to the community how we were going to make decisions. So I'm hearing from Dr. Gorman and district leadership that that's what we're doing. So I really appreciate, Dr. Gorman, your leadership on this. Are there any other specific questions about this update?
Yeah, I do have just one question. You know, I support the, you know, obviously following the health department's guidelines, but it would be helpful, particularly just in speaking to folks around the community when we are asked that question. You know, how was so-and-so district within Kent County able to go to school and we aren't? And you know, again, I'm not saying that. So I guess what I'm getting at, I don't know, Dr. Gorman, I don't know if it would be appropriate to ask our folks at the health department a similar question. I would assume that other districts are, you know, not just dismissing the health department's guidelines. I'm assuming they've been in conversation with them as well, and just be good to have a little bit of insight so we could field that question as it comes to us, you know, in the near future.
Well, as you've noticed, Mr. Ross, we've been super transparent. We brought the health department in last week. They're receptive to joining us in as many meetings as we need them to. The document that they just released is the one that we are following that says K8 can be back with 3 feet and 912 can only be back if you can get to 6 feet, and we can't get to 6 feet with 912. But I hear what you're saying, Mr. Ross.
Yeah, I'm not asking them to come back to a meeting, but I guess I'm just asking if someone from the staff could just reach out to ask that question and just relay the response to us.
I sure will. Thank you.
Dr. Gorman, with the questions with regards to the students and classroom size and all of that, my question would be, if we were to bring those students back with that 6 feet, would that then require additional staff and teachers in order to do that? I know some schools may not necessarily be at full capacity, so they may have room to grow, but does that then turn around and impact how many teachers we need?
Yeah, there are some instances throughout the district where we actually are going to have to get a few more staff members to support us through until the end of the school year. One huge positive that we have is we have many student teachers in the system who are working alongside, of course, their supervising teachers right now. And there are some instances where we can split classrooms up where they can work maybe in a co-teaching model. And so the class can stay together. They won't be switching a teacher of record, but that student teacher can help out and be a long-term sub until the end of the school year. So this is an optimal time for something like this to be happening because the student teachers' placements are finishing up and they can continue to support the teachers that they've been supporting.
All right, thank you, Dr. Gorman. Let's move forward to bringing Kurt Johnson.
President Shockey, if we could bring, or Craig, can we bring Kurt Johnson in, please?
Welcome, Mr. Johnson. Do we have you, Mr. Johnson? There we go.
See me?
We can see you, yes.
All right, I can see you guys. All right, good evening. Good evening, Madam President Shockey, Superintendent Dr. Roby, and distinguished board members. I'm happy to be with you on this evening to share a few updates as they relate to testing protocols for student athletes that is scheduled to begin this Friday, April 2nd. But I first must say thank you all for hanging in there with us. As you know, that it's been quite the up and down roller coaster ride all year long. And thank you, the parents and students and the staff, for your continued patience and understanding. But as you have recently heard, the governor shared that there would be required testing, COVID testing for student athletes before each practice and before each competition. We have since received some updated and more guidance on this requirement, and the testing cycle for student athletes will now be weekly or once per week. So this will be in addition to our already daily screening process. Our teams have went to work in collaboration with Kim Barron, who leads our nurses division, to develop plans and a routine regimen that would meet all the requirements. And in those plans, each school would have to fill out an enrollment application to be a part of the testing program. And the testing for student athletes will be for ages 13 through 19. Each student athlete and their parents will receive 2 forms. And one of the forms is a consent form to participate in the cycle of testing. And the other is a code of conduct that ensures that the students will be following all of the COVID protocols and the guidance to participate in sports. And so they have a lot of information for the parents in those 2 documents. They have to sign those and return those to their schools and the athletic directors. Schools will also, they have started ordering supplies, and they'll get those through the Kent ISD for the testing, rapid test supplies there. And also all of our coaches will be participating in a training video on how to administer the rapid tests. Our nurses will also participate in that training video in case some coaches have some lingering questions or some wonderings about the process. The schools will designate a testing location, and they'll try to keep that consistent so that they don't compromise the testing result. The testing schedule will be by sport. So there'll be a specific day and time. So for example, baseball could be Mondays at 3:30, softball could be Tuesday at 3 o'clock. And they'll keep that schedule throughout the season. In case there is a positive test result, our normal test protocols will kind of kick into place. Students will be isolated, and the appropriate next steps will take place. They will also designate a waiting area for results, because this is a rapid test. They'll get test results back within 10 or 15 minutes there. And then also they will have a designated spot to dispose properly of used testing supplies. So April 2nd is this Friday, and it really kicks off into our spring break. And so we have a couple of teams that will be participating, doing workouts over the spring break. So they will encounter the first round of the testing process. So it kind of gives us a chance to do a dress rehearsal with some smaller numbers before everyone returns on April 12th for all of the sports there. So we're looking forward to continuing to proceed with caution and moving forward, keeping health and safety in mind. And hopefully we will be able to mitigate any challenges throughout the season and continue to offer these programs for our students and families. Thank you. You have any questions?
So if they don't want to participate or agree, this is a consent, or they must participate, which one is it? They must participate, or they have the choice of?
They have a choice not to participate in the testing, but then you can't participate in athletics.
Okay, so they don't have a choice. They either do it or they don't play sports.
Correct.
Okay.
So I would just say, keep your seatbelt on and continue the ride with us. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Johnson. We appreciate you joining us this evening and for these updates on athletics. All right, I'll move into our final order of business this evening, which is an update on our board meetings. Board members will begin meeting in person after spring break concludes. For all committee meetings, we will meet at the district's central office located at the Franklin campus in the auditorium, where we can appropriately physical distance and stay safe. For all full board meetings, so that's work sessions, including the work session on April 12th, and regularly scheduled Board of Education meetings, we will utilize the City High Middle Auditorium, as that will allow for appropriate physical distancing of board members, and also will allow for, I believe, 100 guests to attend safely, so that they can either deliver public comment or have district staff there to deliver reports. Any
we have to
questions?
wear shoes to board meetings now?
Yeah, no more slippers. Well, I suppose it's your choice, but I would recommend shoes. Yes, yes. It's going to be great to see you all. Any questions? Okay, with that, I will wish our staff and our students and our families a happy spring break, and just a reminder that we need your help. Wear your mask, stay physically distanced, stay in your pod of folks, be safe, because that allows us to continue to operate this district in the way that we desire, which is to have our kids in person as much as possible to deliver the best education we can. So thank you for doing your part. Thank you, families and students and staff, for your support of this district. With that, oh, excuse me, public comment, forgive me, I'm jumping ahead. We do have 4 people who would like to address the board this evening. So I'm going to invite those folks forward. Again, my apologies. So first, we'll invite up Mary Bowens, please. Ms. Bowens, welcome. Oh, Ms. Bowens, you're on mute.
Of course I am. I think that's standard when you do a Zoom meeting. Somebody's got to be on mute.
Right.
I'm happy to oblige. First, I want to let you know that our collective bargaining agreement allows for the association to be recognized as part of the agenda for all regular board meetings. So I wanted to make sure that that was that you were aware. I also wanted to let you know that we believe our GREA press release last week was warranted to inform the larger community of the concerns that remain for the return to 4 days of instruction. As educators, we wholeheartedly support students being in school in front of a teacher. For those who had read the release, it was totally focused on the students and the community. Educators have had a chance to be vaccinated, and we are concerned about the public that we serve. So a few of the points that I want to bring up, even from last Monday, is that the county COVID numbers have been rising at an alarming rate. And that concerns us for a number of reasons. First of all, a lot of our students' parents are not vaccinated. They're not in that age group that has had the access to the vaccine. So that is a concern that we have in our community. Another thing that we're looking at is the fact that spring break is coming, and we know that a lot of our families and a lot of our students travel. So there is a concern for the COVID numbers being reflected after spring break. And that we know that we're still having classrooms where students are being sent home because of positive cases and exposure. So entire groups of students are now being quarantined because of the COVID numbers that are happening in schools. So obviously our recommendation and we urge the district to follow their own COVID dashboard plan that was outlined in the original document. Another issue that we have is that we have come up with 78 rooms that are beyond the limited occupancy in the data that we've received from our staff members. We had FOIA'd the information of the class lists, and we received the numbers of students, but we didn't receive the room number that those teachers worked in. So we couldn't get much more data without the room number, because we know the teacher, we know how many students they have, but we don't know what their space is. So a solution to that would be to make sure that we have air purifiers in all rooms that have an occupancy above the numbers in the ventilation report. Another issue that we want to make sure is followed is the equity for students. Some of our secondary core classes have up to 67 students in a class list. We have an elementary classroom that has 68. Others are up to 58. These aren't electives. These are core classes or general education classes. So what we would want is a quality education for all students and equity in the class sizes that they are experiencing across the district. We want to make sure that we have the support, the social emotional support for students. Because again, students are changing teachers, they're getting new schedules. They have teachers who they've had all year, but now they're not going to have because the room is being split between a substitute and the regular teacher. So we believe that it's important to have trained and certified staff in all the buildings. Cleaning protocols have not been well defined, and we're getting multiple mixed messages from different sources. So we're hearing things like there's no need to clean between classes anymore. There is supposed to be a new cleaner with a shortened dwell time so that teachers can get their rooms cleaned faster. It's been made available to some of the buildings and not the other buildings. And we're still waiting for that information to be shared and that product to be put out there so that people can utilize their time. So what we're asking is that we have consistent information about the products and their use, and then the protective gear that we need to keep students and staff safe from using the chemicals. You've already talked about social distancing. That was another issue that we have, but I want to make sure that the social distancing is recognized as far as unmasked activities like meals. Students have to be 6 foot. Many of the cafeterias and gyms don't accommodate that spacing. There's also a 6 foot recommendation between adults and students. So that would be the teacher in any grade level. And then we have also a 6 foot required for activities that increase their exhalation rate, such as music ensembles and PE classes. So there are some adjustments and some issues that have to be considered when we have some of those groups gathering. So we want to make sure that the district is consistently following the recommendations for all of the gatherings of groups of students across the district. So thank you for listening, and we will be enjoying our spring break. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bowens. Next, I'd like to invite forward Laura Workman, please. Welcome, Ms. Workman.
Hi, thank you for having me. I have 2 high schoolers at the museum school, so I'm thankful to already have heard that we are not going to recommend 4 days, but I would like to share my concerns just so they're part of the public record, I guess. Like I said, my 2 students are at museum school, and the way that they have implemented the 2-day hybrid model has been so safe. They literally have no close contacts except possibly at lunch during the day. And luckily, my daughters are actually able to sit together at lunch. They allow 2 students per table, so they don't even have a close contact during lunch. So I feel very confident in the 2-day model right now for their safety. If we move to 4 days, the students will have to be much closer in all parts of the school day, and they will definitely have more close contacts than 0. The other issue is the difference that I see that would happen for instruction to the students who are virtual. High school teachers are able to teach both virtual and in person at the same time, and they've done a great job. So really, there's not a difference in instruction. However, there are, of course, discrepancies such as access to the teacher during asynchronous time. If we move to 4-day, those virtual students will have much less access than the in-person students. Also, I'm part of the PTCC, and I've heard from families at museum school that there are some who made a decision back in November for virtual and have not been asked by the district for another decision for a change. Extenuating circumstances have been addressed by the school, and so I know some changes have happened, but there are some families who simply didn't feel safe in November and now maybe would, seeing how it's been going. But there's been no chance to make a new decision given to them by the district. If we are making such a big change, like to move to 4 days, I think it would be respectful to our families to give them a new opportunity to decide what is best for their students. When I made the decision to have my kids go hybrid, a 4-day option was not what was on the table. A new plan should allow for a new choice given to parents.
With the positivity rate at 10%, according to the COVID Act Now dashboard, with an interpretation of a high risk level, I'm thankful, like I said, that you're not moving forward to the 4 days at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Workman. Next, I see Stephanie Ferenci.
Ms. Shaki, I don't find anyone in the meeting with that name.
All right, thank you. If you happen to have a different name on the participant list, please feel free to virtually raise your hand and we'll bring you in that way. The last name that I have is Lindsay Spindler.
I also don't see a name in the attendee list.